but I wouldn't say it's lovely.
All right, well, this week we're in week 10. We're in the establishing phase of the church plant, and so we have walked through the envisioning, the preparing, the launching phase, and now we're into establishing. So the church is going. You've launched. This is, several months in, several weeks, several months in, and ongoing, several years in even. So you're establishing things. You're figuring things out. And so this week's topics were gathering for worship and preaching, and then scattering for mission and growth through small groups. And so now that happens in a lot of different ways. Small groups can be Sunday school ministry, it can be home groups, it can be things that are on campus. There's a lot of different approaches and ways to do it. And so with our topics this week of the gathering for worship and preaching, so that's the Sunday morning, getting everyone together for that celebration type service. For many, that is kind of the big event of the week for most churches. And so your reading and your discussion board really heavily focus on some of the preaching and the gathering times. And so the lectures this week are focusing a little bit more on the discipleship aspects, especially seen in small groups. And so last Tuesday, Dr. Upshaw discussed with us building a disciple-making culture in the church. And so today, Caleb is going to discuss kind of the whys and hows of small group ministry. And so Caleb's going to introduce a little bit more about himself and where he is. He's a lay guy who loves his church, and he is coordinating the small group ministry at Revo Church. And so he's going to share a little bit about what he does, and he's got a lot of resources that he has shared with me in Dropbox. I'm going to put those on Google Drive for everybody, and so as he references some today, you will have those tonight when I get back. Put all those in so everyone have that. So we appreciate him putting all those together. And so, visit you guys later. You'll have fun. Caleb, take it away.
Is this your farewell address?
This is my Acts 20.
I'm going to cry and embrace it.
Oh, no, I was going to hoop and holler.
I don't want you to cry and embrace me. That would be a little bit odd.
We'll embrace you, all right.
All right, yeah, so today is kind of some of the whys and the nuts and bolts of starting and even establishing small groups. And so Caleb, take it away. I'm going to head on.
See you, brother. Yeah. So I mean, you guys kind of get a little introduction about me. I am passionate about a few things in life. One of those is Jesus. Another is my wife. The Cubs. Come on. It was a great year for us. We're getting there.
They should have won Back to the Future.
I know. Coffee and community. And so when it comes to small groups and community groups, there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of say it. So churches will call them small groups, community groups, life groups, transformation groups, missional communities, all different kinds of things like that. Typically, I'm probably going to be using the phrase community groups because that's probably more of the model I've been in before. That was just kind of the name that we've had for it. But I've been involved with different community groups since I was about 19, leading community groups, helping start new ones, multiplying. And so it's something that I've been a part of for a long time. It's something that has really worked its way into my DNA. It's just something I'm passionate about. And that's why I've stepped on board to help lead the community life at Revo Church and just kind of help our church plant move forward in that aspect. And I think, for church planners, myself being one of them, I'm going to be planning in Asheville soon. We're really excited about community groups. That's something that is like a part of what a community group is. You think, or church plant. You think church plant, you think community groups because it's just what they are. I don't know. It's like the new sexy thing now. Yeah. We're moving away from the Sunday school model, and so we do groups. And one of the things that we're really excited about is figuring out how we're going to do these groups. Like, what are we going to do at this time? When are we going to do these? All of these practical things that we try to wrap our mind around and try to plan out. But I would contend to you, as someone who is planting myself, as someone who has been in churches who are trying to figure out community groups, one of the things that I see is that we get focused and wrapped up so much around the how we're going to do it that we forget to ask why we even do it. Mm-hmm. I got together with a guy a couple of weeks ago who's at a local church here. He's a leader in community groups. And he was just telling me that their church started community groups for the sole reason that another church down the road had them, and they felt like they should probably do the same thing. There was not a whole lot of reasoning for why is this important to us? Where do we see scripturally why we should be living out community in the context of groups? And so today, what I really want to talk about, just at first at least, is really setting a foundation for why we do community. I think that is one of the most important things, because as we look to start and get people plugged into community groups, we need to have a solid motivation. And as we look to sustain community groups, we need a motivation that's going to sustain, because one of the realities of community is that it's messy. Community is one of the messiest parts of church that you are ever going to experience. When you start doing them, you're going to find yourself helping people who are going through adultery. You're going to find people who are questioning divorce. You're going to find people who are struggling with pornography addictions or drug addictions. You've got the people who are, you got guys who are there just to scope out girls. You've got people who are just showing up because it's the cool thing to do. But what we need to do is help people understand why this is such an essential part of what we are doing as the church. And so I want to come up here, and I just want to kind of get your guys' ideas on a couple things. This is something that I've done with people before, just to get an idea, because I think this is a really helpful exercise. But as church planners, we ultimately have to come up for ourselves why we are going to do community groups. That's going to be an important thing. But not only are you going to have to stop there, you are going to have to talk to people who come up to you and say, pastor or leader or something like that, why should I be in a community group? And so that's what I want to ask you guys. Like, from your own perspective, if someone came up to you and asked you why you should be part of a community group, what reasons would you give them?
Community.
Community?
No, that was just a funny answer.
Okay.
Well, in a way, community.
What about it?
A sense of belonging.
Belonging. Okay. That's great.
We all like to feel we belong somewhere.
Yeah. What else?
I think like the expectation of like immediate growth is what people expect in like the main service, but it really happens in small groups.
Okay.
Or like
Yeah, absolutely.
maturity and stuff.
What else?
Discipleship.
Discipleship. Okay.
It could be a little more intimate in a small group setting.
Okay. What else?
And with the intimacy, that can help with like that kind of brings out confession, and where you were talking about you deal with people with all these different things, more so than someone trusting people to just come to the pastor and share their struggles.
Yeah.
Confession. Yeah. Anything else? Even if it's not you, what do you think? You've heard other people say, hey, here's why you should be involved in something like this.
Well, I've heard the bogus reason, like you mentioned, just because.
Because, yeah. I don't even know when I read that. That's
I don't know.
How about friendship?
Yeah.
Build friends. Fun.
What is that?
I don't know. Some groups don't know it. How about even as a church planter or pastor? Here's some of the things we think about, like closing the back door. Right? You guys heard that? So we got the people in. How do we make them stick?
Oh yeah.
Do mission.
Yeah.
Yeah. Know the Bible better. Food. Listen, I've been invited to groups. Man, we have food. You should come.
Girls or guys.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier.
So build relationships.
Singles ministry.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of good things here. There's a lot of good things. There's more that I could add. We could probably go on for a couple more minutes about this. But here's some things that I think we don't typically hear when we get asked, hey, why should I be in community? One of those things is we're reflecting God's image. We were created for community. And another thing is we were saved for it. And here's what I want you guys to see. A lot of what we do when we try to push community, when we try to get people involved into it, we let people know about the what's of community. We let a lot of people know about the fours of community, what it's for. But a lot of time what we're lacking when we build a foundation of community as we start churches or as we try to get people into it, is we fail to really give people an idea of why we do community. And what happens when we do that, when we focus on the what's and fors, we make community and church something that we do. And that's a big thing. When we make church and community something that we just do, we lose out on remembering that God always intended community and church to be something that we are. So we get this idea of action-based or works-based sort of things instead of identity-based that God was always calling us to be. And that's really the mind shift that I think we as leaders need to start having. We need to have a shift of mind to start seeing community, to start seeing our groups, to start seeing this calling instead of something that we do, it's something that we are. And I just want to give you an example of how important that is. So you can probably imagine just the daily grind of life, right? And I think one of the best ways to illustrate that is with a juggler, right? So you've got this guy, we'll just say it's Chad. Now Chad has a lot going on in life. So what are some things that he's probably trying to juggle in life? Family, yeah. What else? Family, job, yeah. Church. Community, say that. What else? Friends,
sure.
hobbies. We're gonna have fun, right? Chores, responsibilities. There's a lot of things.
Yeah.
I mean, if we went on, we could probably add them up. And so Chad has got all of these things that he has to do in life. And when he's looking at things that he has to do, inevitably when there becomes too many things, he's going to drop the ball on one of those, right? It's going to be easier to juggle with less balls than it is with more. And one of the things that I contend that people drop first is going to be their community, these groups, these certain things, because they look at it as just another thing to do. It's another thing to fill their calendar, and if there's something else that comes on, TV or, all of these other things, they can take the place of them because we have this mentality, this mindset of, well, community is just another thing I have to do. I just don't have time for it. But I think the Bible gives us something completely different to look at. And so what I want to do with you guys, just to help you guys understand, to help us understand, to help leaders understand, we need to have a change of vision, drastically. As leaders of churches, our hearts have to change so that we can communicate this to the people, right? And so I want to ask 3 questions in regards to community. And what I want to do is give you guys a vision for what community is. And we're going to look at that through 3 different lenses: why, what, and for. So why do we community? How or what do we do to do community, to be community? And what is the purpose of it? So we're just going to look at a few scriptures. I have a lot I can say, but I don't have a ton of time, so we might not read through all of it. But you guys can write down the passages at least, just to kind of have a solid foundation you can go back to scripturally, because I think ultimately we want to have a vision sent from God that's given to us by Him, and not just something we make up or read in the next best book that's come out on community, right? So when we look at why, we want to have a motivation that we can give people for why do we do community. And I think it starts in the very beginning. Genesis, when we start out in God's Word, we see God creating. He is making everything. He is establishing a foundation and a framework through which everything is going to function and exist. And so one of the first things that God does is makes man. And in Genesis 2:18, you see God telling the first man that He makes, Adam, it is not good for you to be alone. So He's looking at him. There are multiple of everything, but there is just one man. And He looks at him and says, it is not good for you to be alone. Well, why is that? And the reason for that, why it is not good for man to exist alone, we see in Genesis 1:27, when it says that I will make man in my image. And so what does that mean, being made in someone's image? So you're going to be having a baby here soon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you have that baby is going to possess certain characteristics that you and your wife pass down to him. The baby might have your eyes or your beautiful flowing hair, and it's the same way when God created us. He passed on certain qualities to us that had always existed in Himself. And one of those things is this idea of community. Because God existed forever as the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, always in perfect peace, unity, and harmony with one another, always being able to relate, never alone, existing in community forever. And when God created the first man, He passed that down to Adam. He says, just as I exist to live in community, you exist to live in community. And that's why He made Eve, because not only is he meant to be in community with God, he's made to be in community with others. And so when people ask, man, why do we do community? It's because we are image bearers of God, and it's what He created us for. It's what we were made to live out our lives in. But as you see, not much more than a chapter later, you see all of that being broken. When the fruit stained our first parents' lips, the relationships that they were made for with God and for with other people is broken. And so we just live in broken community ever since then, because of our sin, because of selfishness, because of pride. There's all sorts of reasons that community does not exist the way that it should. But God loves community so much, and He is so dedicated to it. He knows that we need it, and He knows that we cannot fully function and live out the lives that we've been called to live and created to live without it. He sent His own Son, Jesus, to die on a cross for us. You guys know the gospel. And I think one of the best passages for this, just to kind of see what He has done to reestablish community, is in Ephesians 2. Ephesians 2, verse 17 through 22. You hear Paul saying this to the Ephesian church. So in 17 through 22, he says this: And Jesus came and preached to you who were far off, and peace to you who are near. For through Him we both have access again in one Spirit to the Father. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus Himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure being joined together grows into a holy temple of the Lord. In Him you also are being built into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. And so you see Jesus, when he came and he gave his life on the cross, ultimately what he accomplishes for us is salvation. But one of those things wrapped up in that is this idea that now we have community again with God, and we have community with one another. And so not only did God create us for it, he paid the ultimate price and saved us so that we could experience it. And so, like, when we look at community, you know, it's not just another thing we do. Like, it runs so much deeper than that. It's who we are. And ultimately, this should be the ultimate motivation for why we do community. It's not about food. It's not about, you know, confession, repentance. It's not about growth. It's not about mission, necessarily, even. Those are all good things that come as a result of something. And it's who we are. And so God is not just extending this to you. He's not just saying, like, hey, here's what I want you to do. Here's another thing I want you to do. No. The gospel reminds us that this is who we are. This is the identity that we have. We are a community because that's what he created us and he saved us for. And so why? That's what why is. And that brings us to the what. You know, I could really go into a lot of detail and specifics about the what, but I really want you guys to see a few things. And so I'm going to give you 3 passages of Scripture. The first is Colossians 3, 12 through 17. Colossians 3, 12 through 17. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I just want you guys to simply see one thing with all 3 of these passages. Here in this passage, we have an incredible list of what it looks like to be community, the things that happen in community. But it says this at the beginning: put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, and it goes on to outline all these things that he's calling us to do. But I want you to see that it's not just a straight command to do these things. God specifically chose to put a reminder in there first before he calls us to do those things. He calls us and reminds us that we are God's chosen people. We're his chosen ones. And so what he's saying is, you know what? What we do flows out of who we are. What we do comes from the identity that we find that God has given us. Another example is Acts 2. I know you guys probably just read this one not too long ago. And it's probably one of the biggest examples of, hey, here's what community should look like in a church. It talks about the new church of God and all the amazing things that they're doing with each other. But it starts off with verse 41 after a sermon that Peter preaches. And it says, so those who received Peter's words were baptized, and they were added that day about 3,000 souls. And so all these things don't just happen. This church doing all these amazing things, it doesn't just happen because they just decide to do it. It happens because God saved their souls. It happened because they found their new identities in Christ as Christians. And from that flowed all of these other things. And the last one I want to show you is 1 Peter 2, 9 through 12. 1 Peter 2, 9 through 12, it says this. It's another outline for what community can look like, practically lived out. But it starts with, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession. And then comes the rest of what? But all that to say is, like, if we want people to be able to live out community, if we want them to be confessing, if we want them to be diving deeper into the Word, if we want them to be on mission, all these things that we desire to see lived out in our communities, it comes from reminding people who they are in Christ. It comes from being reminded that I'm a child of God. I'm saved by grace. I am a royal priesthood, a holy nation. And then everything else is going to follow. And so that's what the what comes from. And then lastly, I want to look at 4. And honestly, this is probably one of the most helpful things for me as a leader of community, because this is going to give you a good framework for how are we doing as a group, how are we doing as a community. Because if we're people that are living out the why, if we know our identity in Christ, and if what we're doing flows out of that, then we're going to be accomplishing this for. So, take this. And really, when we think about what we want to be for as Christians, it's probably a good place to think of, hey, what is God for?
Yeah.
Right? So, as we look at the scriptures, I contend, among many other people who are much smarter than I, that there are three things that God is all about. From the first pages in Genesis to the last page in Revelation, there are three things that God is all about. The first one is God's glory. It's all about glory. The next one is growth. God is constantly seeking for people to be changed more into the likeness of God, more into the likeness of Christ. And the last thing is the Great Commission. It sounds like Dustin has really done a great job pointing out several of these things with you guys. But if God is all about this, and ultimately, at the end of time, this is what is going to happen, then that's what we should be seeking as community groups. That's what we should be seeking as we advance the community. And why would you say these things are important?
Because God does.
God does? Yeah, absolutely. Why else?
Well, growth and Great Commission, you have to ask the question why we do those things. And that is because we seek to glorify God.
Yeah.
Which is our utmost responsibility as believers.
Mm-hmm.
That's our primary, which happens to be at the very top. That's what we need to be about ultimately.
So this, ultimately, when we are glorying in God, when we see Him as ultimate, when we see Him as worthy, we're going to be changed, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
When we are just blown away by God and what He's done in our life, we're going to tell people about that, right? Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Do you think that, I just want you to see, these are all interconnected. Like, it's very important just to see, like, man, like, you can't have one without the other. You can't truly be growing unless you're beholding the glory of God. And you're not really growing if that's not extending out into the Great Commission. You can't do the Great Commission if you don't glory in God and if you're not growing yourself, right? And so, you know, a lot of churches, a lot of people who look at their community groups, we tend to focus on one of these things. But really, in the end, you can't do one without all the others, right? They're all wrapped up in each other. And so this is a framework that you can look at your own life, you can look at your church, you can look at your community groups and ask, how are we doing? Because if we're not living out this full vision for what God created community for, then we're missing out. And not only that, these are all things that we can live out individually, right? But why do you think God is calling us to do this in the context of community? What do you guys think might, if we truly are made for this, if we were created for this, if we were saved so that we can experience community, and he's saying this happens in the context of community, what advantage is there to living this out in the context of community? What do you guys think?
What advantage is there to living those things out in the context of community? That's a good question. I don't know. I probably know it, but it's just not coming to mind.
You guys are married, right?
Mm-hmm.
How have you seen your growth change since you've been married?
It's
Because if you're anything like me, my marriage was a huge catalyst for my growth. Because you know what? I didn't realize how selfish I was.
Yeah.
until I got married. I didn't realize how prideful I was until I got married, because there are people around us pointing out those things. And in the context of church, the church community, that's the same thing that we find. And when we do that in the context of community, we have people who are able to point us to the heart, to the truth, because our hearts are deceitful, right? You know, Jeremiah nailed it when he said, your heart is deceitful, because we don't see everything that we should see about ourselves. And people are continually pushing us toward grow. That's the context of community. Like, you're going to grow a little on your own, but you can grow exponentially more in the context of community. Man, how many times do we forget about who God is and what He's done for us? I constantly need people reminding me, preaching the gospel to me, because I am so apt to forget and so apt to wander. And so people are continually pointing me to Christ. And I am able to glory in Him more than I could ever on my own. In the context of community, and I would contend that the Great Commission is hard to do on our own. I have talked with several people about my faith, and they've heard about the gospel. You know, they've heard all of the good news. But really, what people want to say is, okay, that's nice. How about you show me it, though? How about you show me this change that's happened? How about you show me people that have been affected by God's glory? And when you step into community, like a community group, and you see the way people are living with one another, the way that people relate, people who would have nothing to do with each other outside of the context of Jesus Christ, loving one another, forgiving each other, encouraging one another, providing for one another. That is when people are going to be blown away by the good news of the gospel, because they don't just hear it, they actually see it in action. And so we're not just able to say, hey, let me tell you about it. We're able to say, come and see. Or we're able to take it out to them and say, look, this is what Christ has done for us. And so all of these things, I believe, man, God wants us to live in community because we're able to reflect who He is even more than we could have ever on our own. Sinclair Ferguson has an awesome quote. It says that the church lies at the very center of the eternal purpose of God. So hear that again. The church, not the individual, but the church lies at the very center of the eternal purpose of God. It was not a divine afterthought. It's not an accident of history. On the contrary, the church is God's new community. For His purpose, conceived in eternity past, being worked out in history, and to be perfected in the future eternity, is not just to save isolated individuals and so perpetuate our loneliness, but rather to build His church. That is to call people out of the world into a people for His own glory. And so what he's saying there, and he gets this from Ephesians 3:10 through 11. He says that, from all of eternity, there were many ways that God could have declared who He was. God could have used the rocks. He could have used the trees to cry out, and oceans to proclaim to people exactly who He was. But instead of doing that, He chose to build a church. He chose to build a community that reflected this and told people who lived it out every single day, because He created them for it. He saved them for it. And ultimately, this is what is going to motivate us to live out in community. This is what's going to sustain us. Because if we base it on all the other things, it's not going to last. Because a lot of the things that we try to do, or the things that we try to accomplish, it's not always going to happen exactly the way we think about it. It's going to get messy. And so if we do it all to just build accountability or something like that, we're going to crash and burn. Any excuse that we can make up can crash and burn. But ultimately what lasts is the identity that we have. And so no matter how hard it is, no matter how rough it goes, we can know that, hey, this is who I am. And I can keep going with it because this is who God has created me to be. And this is who He saved us to be. And so, when people ask us, why should I be in community? This is what God is inviting us to tell them.
it's going to be more than a 2-minute conversation. Maybe that's going to be something that you have to sit down at lunch to unpack for them, or over coffee. But what's the benefit in that too, over a 2-minute conversation? You're able to establish those relationships and build that community that we're inviting them into. That's the invitation God's inviting us all into. And I don't have much longer, but I think that is something that's truly important. I think that's something that churches and leaders need to get behind, because ultimately when we see that, everything else comes into place. It's like the verse, seek first the kingdom of God and everything else will be added unto that. When you are seeking God in community in this context, everything else is going to happen. Because vision is the combination of a conviction of what must be plus the imagination of what could be. All right? That's what vision ultimately is. And if you've got the right conviction of what it should be, you guys, when you look at community groups, when you look at that, you're going to be able to have imagination to do whatever you want with that. Man, as long as you are seeing it based from your identity and you're seeing God's glory, His growth, and the Great Commission done, you have a lot of different options for how that can look. There's so much freedom in that. And I think this is probably in one of the handouts that you guys are going to get in the Dropbox, but another framework that you can look at, there's 5 identities that a lot of smarter people than me have said Christian life ultimately boils down to. Identities that we want to grow in as Christians and see our groups grow in. The first is worshipers. We want people to grow as worshipers of God. We want people to grow as disciples. We want people to grow as servants, as family, and as witnesses. When you look at the Bible and you see all the callings that God has called us to as Christians, ultimately we can fit it into one of those 5 categories. And if you want to look at, man, how are my people growing in my group? You can look at those 5 categories and say, man, how are we, I don't see that person serving very well. So how can I use our group to help grow people as servants? A lot of people are not really great at the Great Commission, right? How can we use our group to help people grow as witnesses? Because a lot of these groups are really good at like worship and discipleship, because we spend a lot of time in the Bible. They get that on Sunday morning as well. Sometimes they're really good at being family, just hanging out and everything. But a lot of times we miss out on certain things that God has called us to be as Christians. And what we end up doing is you guys ever been to the gym? See people working out, those guys who just do all upper body, but they have these scrawny chicken legs, That's what we're doing when we're not focusing on helping people fully flesh out the calling that they've been given as Christians. When we focus on 1 or 2 of these things, we get a lot of Christians who just have the scrawny chicken legs, but they're really good in the upper bodies. I was in seminary for 3 years up in Louisville, and I hung out with a lot of people who were really good at discipleship. They read all the books, and they walked around. I don't know if you guys have ever played James Bond, 007 on N64.
This is Scott Boyle.
I don't know. Yes, it is. So yeah, DK mode. They're walking around with those huge ass. That's like what it was at seminary. You got all of these people who are just, they're disciples and they know so much. But man, when you ask them to do something, when you ask them to share that gospel, when you ask them to serve, they have no frame of mind for what that looks like. And so, man, ultimately, we need to have the imagination and the freedom to use our community groups to, how can we grow in all of these ways? And maybe some weeks it's doing Bible study or sermon, a breakdown of the sermon. That's what my group looks like. Because that's important. We need people to grow. There's a lot of young Christians in our church, and so we need them to grow. But we also take time to serve about once a month at a fire station, just going and providing a meal for those guys. We're going to be starting to do neighborhood engagement because we want to reach the people where we're at. Like, if our community groups cease to exist, would people care? Like, if your community group just ceased to exist, would people be like, oh, I didn't know there was a community group? No, we want our neighborhoods
just hurting that we no longer are there. And so, I have much more to say to you guys, but like I said, I'll give that. I'll give you several resources in the Dropbox folder. But man, ultimately, I'm not sad because, I think one of the most important things we can take about it is why, and having that firm foundation as leaders, so that we can instill that vision in the people that are coming into that. And hopefully that's okay with you guys.
Yeah.
But do you guys have any questions or anything, just with anything today?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, and if you guys want to, I'm going to leave number, email with you guys. My number is 815, great state of Illinois, 815-378-0457. And my email is cjduvick, DUVICK, @gmail.com. And if you guys ever want to talk about anything or email now or years from now, I'd love to help in whatever way I can.
Sure.
Because there's a whole lot we can talk about with community.